The secret order: geometry, mathematics, and magic. Chapter 11. Pythagoras and his followers. The early story of Greek geometry is strangely different from its founding in Miletus. Most of what we know is a mixture of myth and magic, shapes and rules, all revolving around a fabulous figure of Pythagoras. He was called the divine Pythagoras, not only after his death, but even in his own lifetime, for the latter part of the 6th century BC was still a time of superstition. The Ionian physiologists had only tried to find an orderly pattern in nature. Most people continued to believe that gods and spirits moved in the trees and the wind and the lightning. Cults were popular all over the Greek world. Mysteries, they were called, that promised to bring their members close to the gods in secret rites. Some were even led by seers. Pythagoras was one of these, a native of the island of Samos, not far from Miletus. He probably had a Phoenician mother and a Greek father who was a stonecutter, but he gained in such reputation for wisdom and magical arts that people began to whisper that he was son of the god Apollo. Actually, Pythagoras was Thales' contemporary, for a time at least. He was born about 20 years before Thales died, so his career spanned a later period. Parts of that career are a matter of history. The political situation in Samos became oppressive. A local tyrant, Polycrates, ruled harshly, and the neighboring Persian Empire demanded heavy taxes. So Pythagoras emigrated and settled in Crotone, a little town at the tip of Italy. There he founded a famous secret society that contributed a great deal to the development of geometry. We might call it the world's first mathematics club. But much of Pythagoras' life is enmeshed in legends, not just amusing anecdotes, as with Thales, but wildly fanciful tales. Far too many discoveries are attributed to him, so we must pick and choose our way among facts and fables in telling the story of Pythagoras and his followers. To begin with, Pythagoras continued where Thales left off. Let us therefore accept the tradition that he was the older man's student. Perhaps rumors of Thales' exciting new game of string, straightedge, and shadows had spread throughout Ionia, and people came from the neighboring cities and islands to take part. Anyway, one visitor in particular was attracted to Miletus to learn his new way of thinking and finding rules and tracing forms upon the ground. The young, full Pythagoras. The aging Thales must have been pleased with the young man's keen interest. Such penetrating questions showed a real thirst for knowledge. Thales taught Pythagoras all that he knew. Then he encouraged him to travel for himself in the ancient lands and study the development of learning at its source. Pythagoras' travels. Pythagoras followed the advice, and his travels were even more extensive than Thales had been. Fired with enthusiasm by the stories of Babylon, he visited that fabulous city to absorb the learning of the Chaldean stargazers. Naturally also, he wanted to see the ancient pyramids, obelisks, and temples of Egypt. There he studied the lore of the priests of Memphis and Diospolis, Thebes. In addition, he learned a great deal just by traveling to all the known parts of the Mediterranean world. During his long sea voyages, the Phoenician sailors taught him much about the importance of stars in navigation. And like Thales before him, he saw things in a way that people had never seen before. Observing and studying, Pythagoras traveled for many years. Some say he got as far as India and was deeply influenced, for he took up Oriental dress, including a turban, and some of his mystical ideas, such as number magic and reincarnation, were typical of the East. Finally, he came back to Samos. We don't really know how his fellow Greeks received him, but a number of stories suggest they were indifferent to all the knowledge he had brought home. This was born out of the tale of Pythagoras' first pupil. Tired of finding no one who would listen to his learning, Pythagoras bought himself an audience. He found a poor boy wearing ragged clothes and offered him a bribe. He would pay 3 oboli for every lesson the boy mastered. To the boy, this was indeed a bargain. By sitting in the shade for a few hours and listening attentively to this wise man, he could make better money than in the whole day's work in the hot sun. Naturally, he concentrated hard as Pythagoras introduced him to mathematical disciplines, from the simple calculations of the rope stretchers to the methods of the Phoenician navigators to abstract rules and reasoning. Pythagoras taught his pupil. Soon the subjects became so interesting that the boy begged for more and more lessons. At this point, Pythagoras explained that he too was a poor man, and paying someone to listen was getting to be very expensive. So they reached another bargain. The boy had saved enough to pay Pythagoras for his future lessons. The story doesn't prove that Pythagoras began to collect a following this way, but it shows the fascination of the new game of string, straightedge, and shadows, and forecasts his great role as a teacher. Spheres in the sky. On the open sea, Pythagoras realized that the surface of the water was not flat but curved. He could see this whenever another ship appeared in the distance. At first, only the top of its mast was visible over the horizon. Then gradually the whole vessel would come into view as it sailed toward them. Surely then, he guessed, the earth must be round. What about the other heavenly bodies? The moon when it was full, or the round disk in the sky, rosy or yellowish or silver white. As it waxed and waned, you could imagine that its surface was curved too, and partly in light and partly in shade. The moon must be spherical. And the radiant sun itself made a blazing circle in the heavens. Pythagoras concluded that the earth and the sun and the moon and the planets were all spheres. That was the great perfect form. In history, he is given credit as the first person to spread this idea. The secret order. What we do know for sure is that Pythagoras left Samos and went to settle in a tiny peninsula off the coast of southwest Italy, which was then busy with new Greek colonies. Crotone has an immortal place in the history of mathematics. There, Pythagoras finally gathered a group of students around him and founded his famous secret order. Like other mystery cults of that time, it was a religious order with initiations and rites and purifications. These Pythagoreans had a special way of life. The members, women as well as men, shared all their simple belongings in common, because Pythagoras taught the doctrine of the transmigration of souls. They were respectful to animals and would eat no meat or fish, because in those creatures might live the soul of some departed friend. Nor would they wear garments made of wool or kill anything except as a sacrifice to the gods. They bound themselves by great oaths to keep secret all their discoveries and teachings. So devoted were they to their leader that any argument was resolved by using the words of authority referring to Pythagoras. He himself said it. But there was one great trait that set this order apart from all the rest. Pythagoras taught that knowledge is the greatest purification. So his followers were, above all, a steady group bent on gaining the knowledge that would free them from endless rebirths. And to the Pythagoreans, as we shall see, this knowledge meant mathematics.